"You're ugly, Emily. You've always been ugly. I just spent 10 years pretending otherwise." Nathan threw the divorce papers across the kitchen table. They scattered onto the floor at her feet. "Pick them up," he said. "Sign them, and do it fast. Serena is waiting for me downstairs." Emily didn't move. She looked at her husband of 10 years standing in his expensive suit, car keys already in his hand, one foot already out the door, mentally, emotionally, completely. He had someone waiting downstairs, while she had been upstairs making his dinner. 2 years later, his face went pale when he saw hers on the cover of Vogue. If you've ever been told you weren't enough by the one person who promised to love you forever, this story is for you. Please subscribe to our channel, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, because I want to see how far this story travels. And stay with me until the very end, because what happens 2 years later will leave you absolutely breathless. She had ironed his shirts that morning. That was the detail Emily Carter could never quite shake loose from her memory, no matter how many years passed, no matter how many therapists she spoke to, no matter how many mornings she eventually woke up to a life that finally felt like her own. She had stood at the ironing board in their shared bedroom on a cold Tuesday in November, carefully pressing the collar of Nathan's favorite blue dress shirt, the one he wore when he had important client meetings, the one she had bought for him on their 6th anniversary because he mentioned only once that he liked the color. She had ironed that shirt with the same quiet care she brought to everything in their marriage, deliberate, patient, invisible. And Nathan had walked past her without a word, picked the shirt up off the hanger, and gone into the bathroom to get ready for work. He didn't thank her. He didn't look at her. He didn't say good morning. Emily had told herself that morning, as she told herself on so many mornings before it, that this was simply what marriage looked like after 10 years, that the warmth faded, that the small gestures stopped being noticed, that she was being too sensitive, too needy, too much. She had become very good at talking herself out of her own feelings. That evening she made dinner, roasted chicken with rosemary and garlic, Nathan's favorite. She set the table properly the way she always did with real plates, instead of the casual ones they used on weeknights. She lit a candle. She changed out of her comfortable clothes into a dress. She brushed her hair and put on the earrings Nathan had given her on their 3rd anniversary, small gold hoops that she wore when she wanted to feel like herself again. She wasn't sure why she had gone to all that trouble. Something in her chest had felt tight all day, some quiet warning she couldn't name, some vibration in the walls of the house that told her things were about to shift. She should have listened to that feeling years earlier. Nathan came home at 7:30. He loosened his tie, set his briefcase near the door the way he always did, and walked into the kitchen. He looked at the table. He looked at the candle. He looked at Emily in her dress and her earrings. And something moved across his face that she would spend months trying to understand. It was not pleasure. It was not warmth. It looked almost like irritation. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, pulling out his chair and sitting down without looking at her again. Emily forced a smile. "I just wanted a nice evening." "I had a long day, Emily." "I know. That's why I cooked." He picked up his fork and began eating without another word. They sat in silence for 20 minutes. Emily pushed food around her plate. The candle burned between them like a small, futile argument. It was Nathan who finally spoke. He set his fork down with a precision that made her stomach tighten. He folded his hands on the table the way he did when he was about to present a strategy to a client. Composed, rehearsed, decided. "I think we need to talk," he said. Emily looked up. "Okay." "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, "about us, about where we are." "Where we are," she repeated slowly. "This isn't working for me anymore, Emily." The candle flame trembled slightly in the still air of the room. "What isn't working?" she asked, even though some deep and ancient part of her already knew. Nathan exhaled. Not the exhale of a man in pain. The exhale of a man who had been waiting a long time to get something off his chest and was finally relieved to do it. "I'm not attracted to you anymore," he said. The words arrived quietly, without drama, without apology. They landed on Emily the way a stone lands in still water, with a small and unremarkable sound before the ripples begin to spread. She sat very still. "I know that's hard to hear," Nathan continued, his voice measured, almost businesslike, "but I think you deserve honesty. I've been trying to make this work for a long time, and I don't feel it anymore. I look at you, and I don't feel what I should feel." Emily found her voice somewhere at the bottom of her chest. "Nathan, "You've changed," he said, "and I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's the truth. You've stopped taking care of yourself. You've let yourself go. And I know life gets busy and I know things change, but I can't keep pretending that this is fine when it isn't." She stared at him. "You think I've let myself go? I'm not trying to attack you. You just told me you're not attracted to me because of the way I look." "Because of the way you've let yourself become," he corrected, as if the distinction mattered, as if the precision of the cruelty made it kinder somehow. Emily set her fork down on her plate. Her hands were not shaking, which surprised her. She had imagined in the occasional frightened corner of her mind where she kept thoughts like this, that if Nathan ever said something like this to her, she would fall apart immediately. She would cry, she would beg. Instead, she felt something very cold and very clear settle over her. "How long have you felt this way?" she asked. Nathan hesitated. "How long, Nathan?" "A while," he admitted. "A while meaning what, months, years?" He looked away. "Emily, it doesn't matter. It matters to me." Her voice was quieter than she expected it to be, quieter and steadier. "I want to know how long you've been sitting across from me at dinner and thinking that you didn't want to be here anymore." "This isn't productive. Answer the question." He was silent for a moment. Then, "About 2 years." 2 years. Emily sat with that number for a long moment. 2 years, 730 mornings of ironing shirts and making coffee and asking how his day went and sitting through his silences and blaming herself for the distance between them. 2 years of wondering what she was doing wrong. 2 years of trying harder, of dieting and exercising and buying new clothes and reading articles about how to reconnect with your partner. 2 years of believing that if she just became better, prettier, more interesting, more effortless, he would look at her the way he used to. 2 years of the problem never being the problem she thought it was. "I see," she said finally. "I think we should separate," Nathan said. He reached into his jacket pocket, his jacket which was still on, she realized, which meant he had planned this. He had come home tonight with the conversation already prepared and placed a folded document on the table. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," he said. "This is just preliminary paperwork. We can keep things civil if we both want to." Emily looked at the folded pages beside the candle holder. "You already spoke to a lawyer," she said. "I wanted to be organized about this." "Organized," she repeated. The word tasted strange in her mouth. "You organized the end of our marriage." "Emily, don't make this harder than it has to be." She looked up at him then, really looked at him. At the face she had loved for 10 years, the face she had memorized in the early days of their relationship, lying beside him in the dark and tracing it with her eyes, the way you memorize something you're afraid of losing. That face was still technically the same face, same jaw, same eyes, same slight furrow between his brows. But something about it was completely unrecognizable to her now. She reached out and picked up the folded papers. "I'll need some time to look at these," she said. "Of course, take a few days." "Thank you for your generosity," she said without a trace of sarcasm, which somehow made the words cut deeper. Nathan blinked. It was the first moment all evening where he seemed slightly uncertain. He had expected something else from her, she could tell. Tears, perhaps, or anger, or pleading. He had steeled himself for a scene and she wasn't giving him one, and the absence of what he expected seemed to unsettle him in a small way. Good, she thought, let him be unsettled. She stood up from this table and picked up her plate and carried it to the sink. She rinsed it carefully. She turned off the burner under the pot she had forgotten to move. She blew out the candle and the smell of warm wax filled the kitchen briefly, like the ghost of something pleasant. "I'm going to go lie down," she said. "You can let yourself out if you need to." Emily. "Good night, Nathan." She walked out of the kitchen and down the hallway to the bedroom that still smelled like both of them, and she closed the door quietly behind her, and she sat on the edge of the bed in her nice dress, with her anniversary earrings still in her ears, and she stared at the wall. And she did not cry, not yet. The crying came later in waves. She hadn't anticipated waves that knocked her off her feet even when she thought she was standing on solid ground. She cried in the shower 3 days later when she finally let herself feel it. She cried in the parking lot of a grocery store on a Wednesday afternoon, sitting in her car with 2 bags of things she barely remembered buying. She cried at 2 in the morning when she rolled over in an empty bed, and the absence beside her was so loud it felt like a sound. But that night, sitting in her dress on the edge of the bed, she didn't cry. she thought. She thought about those 2 years Nathan had described so casually. 2 years of being looked at and found wanting by the one person whose opinion she had allowed to matter most. She thought about all the mornings she had stood in front of the bathroom mirror and cataloged her flaws the way Nathan had taught her to, not with words exactly, but with silences and glances, and the particular way he had of not quite looking at her when she walked into a room. She thought about the woman she had been before all of this. She allowed herself to remember a different kind of woman before Nathan. She had been 23 years old with a second-hand camera and a portfolio of photographs that her professors called remarkable. She had a way of seeing things they told her, a way of finding the emotion in a face, the story in a gesture, the whole long, complicated history of a person in the particular way they held their hands when they thought nobody was watching. She had wanted more than almost anything to spend her life doing that, seeing people, capturing them, telling their stories in light and shadow and the click of a shutter. Nathan had been charming and confident and certain about everything, in a way that Emily, at 23, found enormously reassuring. He knew where he was going. He knew what he wanted. He was the kind of man who made decisions and stuck to them. And after a childhood with a mother whose moods were as unpredictable as weather, Emily found Nathan's certainty intoxicating. What she had not understood not yet was the difference between a man who is certain and a man who is simply unable to tolerate uncertainty. The difference between confidence and control. The difference between a man who loves you and a man who wants to own the version of you that he finds most convenient. The camera had gone slowly. It wasn't a single dramatic moment where Nathan told her to put it away. It was subtler than that. It was the sighs when she spent a Saturday morning at a photography community event instead of accompanying him to his colleagues' brunch. It was the bemused smile when she mentioned a project she was working on, the smile that said without saying how adorable, how small, how quaint your little hobby is. It was the years of having her excitement met with mild indifference, until she learned the way you learn things in long relationships without realizing you're being taught to keep her excitement to herself. She stopped going to events. She stopped developing film. She told herself she would come back to it when things were less busy, when Nathan's career had stabilized, when they had more money, when they had settled into a rhythm. The camera sat in the storage closet gathering dust, and Emily stood at the ironing board and made roasted chicken with rosemary and garlic and told herself that this was what love looked like after 10 years, and she was lucky. She was lucky, she just needed to be better. She signed the divorce papers 8 days after Nathan left them on the kitchen table. She did not call him to discuss them. She did not ask for a meeting. She did not cry in front of a lawyer or spend hours trying to negotiate terms of a marriage that her husband had already finished ending in his head 2 years before he told her about it. She signed them, put them in an envelope, and mailed them. And then she called her mother. Her mother, Patricia, lived 2 hours south of Chicago in the same small house where Emily had grown up. Patricia was 71 years old and had survived 2 divorces of her own and had opinions about everything and softened none of them for the sake of making other people comfortable. She was not. Emily had always known an easy woman, but she was honest, and right now, honest was the only thing Emily could bear. "Mom," Emily said when Patricia answered the phone, "Nathan and I are getting divorced." There was a pause. "Are you surprised?" Patricia asked. Emily opened her mouth, closed it. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm not," Patricia said. "That man never deserved you." "Mom, I'm serious, Emily. I watched that man take up more and more space in your life for 10 years while you got smaller and smaller. I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place, but I noticed. I always noticed." Emily pressed her hand over her eyes. "He said he wasn't attracted to me anymore. He said I'd let myself go." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Emily," she said finally, her voice lower and more careful than usual, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. When is the last time you felt like yourself?" Emily thought about it. She thought about the ironing board. She thought about the dinners and the silences and the 2 years. She thought about the camera in the closet. "I don't know," she said. "That's your answer," Patricia said simply. "That's the whole answer. Now, what are you going to do about it?" Emily moved into her new apartment 3 weeks after signing the divorce papers. It was small, smaller than anything she had lived in since her early 20s, with a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to stand in at the same time, and windows that faced a brick wall, and a radiator that knocked and hissed through the night. She loved it. She loved it with a ferocity that surprised her, the way you love something that is entirely yours in a way that nothing has been entirely yours in a very long time. She unpacked her boxes slowly over the course of a week. Books, clothes, the dishes she had chosen as opposed to the ones Nathan had chosen, a lamp from her college apartment that she had kept through every move because she couldn't bring herself to get rid of it. A photograph her professor had printed for her 20 years ago, a black and white shot she had taken of an elderly man feeding pigeons in a park. His face lifted toward the sky with an expression of such uncomplicated joy that it still stopped her breath a little every time she looked at it. She hung the photograph above her desk. She did not hang any photographs of Nathan. For the first few weeks, she functioned. She went to work. She had been working as a photo editor at a small trade publication for the past 6 years, a job that was steady and undemanding and had long ago stopped requiring any real creativity from her. She came home, she ate, she slept badly. She woke up at 3 in the morning and lay in the unfamiliar dark of her new bedroom and listened to the radiator knock and tried to remember who she was. She saw Nathan's social media profile once 2 weeks after she moved in and immediately wished she hadn't. He was already posting photographs of himself at restaurants and events, already surrounding himself with the new life he had apparently been constructing in secret. And she could see in the background of one of the photographs the dark-haired woman from his office, whom Emily had met exactly twice at company events, and whose name was Serena, and who was 26 years old. 26. Nathan was 41. Emily closed the app and put her phone face down on the coffee table and sat in the quiet of her apartment for a long time. She didn't touch her phone again that evening. Instead, almost without intending to, she stood up and walked to the storage closet. The one where she had put the boxes she hadn't unpacked yet, the ones from the back corners of the house she had shared with Nathan, the ones containing the things she had held onto without quite knowing why. She dug through a box of old papers and a box of winter clothes she had forgotten she owned, and then her hands found something solid and familiar. The camera. She lifted it out of the box slowly. It was heavier than she remembered, or maybe she was just softer than she used to be, less accustomed to holding things up. She turned it over in her hands. The black body was scuffed in a few places she could remember. The lens cap was still on. She had always been careful about the lens. She stood in the middle of her small apartment in the middle of the night with her old camera in her hands, and for the first time in 10 years, something that felt like the opposite of grief moved through her chest. She didn't know yet what was possible. She didn't know yet what was coming. She only knew standing there in the particular silence of a life that had just been emptied out and was waiting to be filled back up, that she was still a woman who knew how to see things, and that Nathan, for all his certainty, had never seen her at all. She set the camera on her desk beside the photograph of the old man and the pigeons. She went to bed, and when she woke up the next morning, it was the first thing she saw. The camera sat on her desk for 4 days before she touched it again. Emily walked past it every morning on her way to the kitchen, every evening on her way to bed. She looked at it the way you look at something that used to belong to a version of yourself you're not sure you're allowed to claim anymore. It sat there beside the black and white photograph of the old man and the pigeons, and sometimes she thought the two things looked like a conversation she wasn't ready to have yet. On the 5th day, she picked it up. She didn't go anywhere special. She didn't have a plan. She simply walked out of her apartment at 7 in the morning with the camera hanging around her neck and started moving through the neighborhood, the way she used to move through neighborhoods when she was 23, and the whole world felt like a photograph waiting to happen. She walked for 2 hours. She took 41 pictures. Most of them were nothing, out of focus, poorly composed, the work of a woman who had been away from something she loved for so long that her hands had forgotten the language. But three of them were something else. A woman at a bus stop, her chin lifted slightly against the wind, her expression carrying 10,000 things she would never say out loud. An elderly couple walking without touching, but somehow entirely synchronized a half-inch of winter air between their hands that felt more intimate than any embrace. A little girl pressing her palm flat against a store window with an expression of complete and uncomplicated desire. Emily stood in her apartment that evening and looked at those 3 photographs on her laptop screen, and she felt something she hadn't felt in so long that she almost didn't recognize it. She felt like herself, not the self Nathan had shaped and named and approved of. The other self, the one who had existed before him, the one who had been waiting in the storage closet with the camera patient and quiet and entirely intact. She called her friend Joanne that night. Joanne Marsh had been Emily's closest friend since college, the kind of friend who had watched Nathan arrive in Emily's life and had never quite stopped watching him with narrowed eyes, the kind of friend who knew when to say something and when to hold it, and who had been holding it for 10 years and was not above admitting that she found the current situation both devastating and, in a complicated way she would never say out loud, slightly inevitable. "I took pictures today," Emily said when Joanne picked up. There was a pause on the line. "Like actual pictures with your actual camera?" "Yes." Another pause. And then Joanne's voice going warm and careful at the same time, the way it did when she was feeling something big and trying not to make it bigger than Emily was ready for. "How did it feel? Like remembering a word I'd forgotten," Emily said. "One I used to know perfectly." Joanne was quiet for a moment. "Em," she said finally, "I need to tell you something, and I need you not to get upset." Emily closed her laptop. "What?" "I saw Nathan's Instagram today." Emily's stomach tightened. "Joanne." "He posted a photo with her, with Serena. They're apparently in Cabo. He tagged the resort." The silence stretched between them. "He's in Cabo," Emily repeated. "He flew to Cabo 4 days after you signed the papers, Em." Emily set her phone on the desk and pressed her hand flat against the surface and breathed. She thought about the 4 days she had spent circling her apartment, barely eating, walking from room to room, in the particular fog of a grief she hadn't yet given herself permission to feel fully. She had been in that fog while Nathan was packing a suitcase for Mexico. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Joanne repeated. "That's all you've got. What do you want me to say, Joanne?" "I want you to say you're furious. I want you to say you're going to do something extraordinary with your life just to spite him, even if spite is not a healthy motivator, because right now I will take it. Despite everything, despite the tightness in her chest and the image of Nathan on a beach somewhere with a 26-year-old woman, while Emily stood in a small apartment with a knocked radiator and 41 photographs. Emily laughed. It was a short laugh and it was slightly ragged at the edges, but it was real. "I'm not going to do something extraordinary to spite him," she said. "Fine," Joanne said. "Do it for yourself, but do something, Emily. You have been invisible for 10 years. It's time to be seen." Those words stayed with her. It's time to be seen. She went back out the next morning. And the morning after that, she started waking up at 6 before the city was fully awake, because the light was different then, and the people moved differently through it, less armored, less performed, more genuinely themselves. She carried the camera everywhere. She started keeping a small notebook where she wrote down what she noticed about each picture she took, not technical notes, but emotional ones. What was the woman at the bus stop feeling? What were the elderly couple's hands saying? What did the little girl want so badly that her whole palm had to be against the glass? She had been doing this for 3 weeks when she walked into the Chicago Community Photography Center for the first time. She almost didn't go in. She had passed the building twice on her morning walks and paused in front of it both times, reading the small placard beside the door that listed the programs and workshops and open studio hours. Both times she had told herself she would come back. Both times she had kept walking. The third time she pushed open the door. The woman behind the front desk was young, maybe 25, with paint on her wrist that had nothing to do with photography. She smiled at Emily with genuine warmth. "First time?" she asked. "Is it that obvious? You're holding your camera like a shield," the woman said, not unkindly. "That usually means first time." Emily consciously lowered the camera from her chest. "I used to do photography, a long time ago. I'm trying to find my way back into it." "Best reason there is," the woman said. She extended her hand. "I'm Keisha. Welcome back." It was Keisha who told her about Daniel Hayes. "He runs a project here every few months," Keisha said, pulling up a flyer on the computer. "He's a creative director, used to do editorial work for the big magazines now. He does more independent stuff, finds people, tells their stories." She turned the screen so Emily could read it. "He's doing something called Women Who Found Themselves Again. He's looking for participants, both subjects and photographers. You could be either." Emily read the description twice. "What kind of photographs?" she asked. "Real ones," Keisha said simply. "That's all he says. Real photographs of real women." Emily took the flyer. She put it in her coat pocket and carried it home and put it on her kitchen table and looked at it for 3 days before she called the number at the bottom. It rang 4 times. She was already composing a version of herself that would be okay with leaving a voicemail and never hearing back a self-protective story about how she had tried, and that was enough when someone picked up. "Hayes. Hi." She cleared her throat. "My name is Emily Carter. I saw a flyer at the Community Photography Center about a project. Women Who Found Themselves Again." A pause, brief but attentive. "You a photographer or a subject?" "Photographer," she said. Although she stopped. "Although what?" She surprised herself. "Although I'm probably both." There was something that might have been the beginning of a smile in his voice. "Can you come in Thursday, bring your work?" "I don't have much recent work," she admitted. "I've only been shooting again for about a month." "Bring what you have," he said. "A month is enough time to see whether someone has something worth seeing." Daniel Hayes was not what she expected. She had constructed a version of him in her head based entirely on the word creative director and the fact that he was apparently respected, which in her experience of Nathan's world meant polished and self-impressed and subtly condescending to anyone he considered below his level. She had prepared herself sitting in the waiting area of his modest studio space on a Thursday morning with her portfolio folder on her lap and her stomach doing something complicated for a man who would make her feel small. Daniel Hayes was 53 years old, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and paint also, not photography related, on his left hand, and he came out of the back of the studio carrying 2 cups of coffee before she had finished standing up. "Emily Carter," he said, handing her one of the cups. "Sit down. Let me see what you brought." She sat. She opened the folder. She pushed it across the table toward him. He looked at the photographs without speaking for a long time. She watched him look at them. She had not done this in years, sat across from someone while they looked at her work, while they formed an opinion in real time, and the vulnerability of it was extraordinary, like being slowly turned inside out. She kept her hands still in her lap by conscious effort. He paused on the photograph of the woman at the bus stop. He paused on it for a long time. "Tell me about this one," he said. "I don't know who she was," Emily said. "I never found out her name. She was waiting for a bus on Michigan Avenue at about 7:15 in the morning, and the light was coming from her left, and she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at nothing, or everything, and her face—" Emily stopped. "Her face was doing something I recognized." Daniel looked up. "What did you recognize?" Emily took a breath. The look of someone who has been somewhere very hard and is deciding right at that exact moment whether they're going to keep going or not. Daniel looked at her over the top of his reading glasses. "How long were you away from photography?" he asked. 10 years. "What happened 10 years ago?" It was a direct question, and she appreciated it. She was tired of dancing around things. She had spent 10 years dancing around things. "I got married," she said, "and then I stopped being myself. And then I got divorced and I found my camera in a storage closet, and here I am." He nodded once, not with pity, with recognition. "The woman in this photograph," he said, tapping the bus stop image. "You see her so clearly because you are her." Emily's throat tightened. "Maybe." "Not maybe," Daniel said. "This is the whole photograph. You're not just capturing her face. You're capturing the moment she decides. That's not something you can manufacture. You either see it or you don't." He closed the folder and leaned back. "I want you in this project, as a photographer, and I'd like you to consider being a subject as well." Emily shook her head immediately. "I don't think that's—" "Why not?" "Because She stopped. The real answer was waiting just beneath the surface. "Because I have spent 10 years being looked at by someone who found me lacking, and the idea of being looked at by the entire world feels like standing in front of a firing squad." She didn't say that. "I'm not a subject," she said instead. "I'm behind the camera." Women who found themselves again, Daniel said quietly, isn't about women who are comfortable being seen. It's about women who are terrified of it. Women who have been told by someone or by the world or by themselves that they are not worth looking at. The project only works if the women in the photographs are real, not models, not women who have been looked at so long it no longer costs them anything. He held her gaze. "I'm asking you because of what I see in your photographs, not in spite of it. The woman who took these pictures is worth seeing. I'd like to argue that case." She took 3 days to say yes. The shoot itself was nothing like what she had feared. She had imagined something clinical and uncomfortable, bright studio lights, and a photographer telling her how to stand her body, becoming an object under someone else's direction, in a way that felt uncomfortably familiar. Instead, Daniel brought in a photographer he had worked with for years, a quiet woman named Rosa, who moved through space the way water moves, barely noticed, entirely present, who asked Emily not to do anything in particular, but simply to be somewhere. "You don't have to be beautiful," Rosa said. "You don't have to be anything. Just be in the room and let me do my job." Emily stood in the natural light of Daniel's studio on a Saturday morning in February and tried to simply be in the room. At first, she couldn't do it. Her body kept arranging itself the way it had learned to arrange itself in Nathan's presence, the particular defensive geometry of a woman who has been told she takes up space wrong. She kept catching herself sucking in her stomach and tilting her chin, and doing all the small, unconscious adjustments that amounted, she realized, standing there, to apology. Her body moving through space in a constant, low-level apology for existing in it. Rosa noticed. "What are you apologizing for?" she asked. Emily looked at her. "Is it that obvious? Your whole body is sorry about something," Rosa said gently. "But we're not here to be sorry. We're just here." Something released in Emily's chest, slowly, the way ice thaws not all at once but in degrees, in small quiet surrenders to warmth. She stopped arranging herself. She just stood there, and Rosa took photographs. Afterward, when Daniel showed her the contact sheet, Emily looked at the images for a long time without speaking. She did not look the way she had expected to look. She had expected to see what Nathan had described, the woman who had let herself go, the woman who was no longer worth looking at. She had been so thoroughly convinced of that version of herself that it had become the only version she could see in mirrors. But these photographs were not taken in the mirror Nathan had held up. She looked like someone who had been through something and survived it, and was standing on the other side of it. Not unscathed, not pretending, just there, present. Real. "That's me," she said. "That's you," Daniel said. "I don't look—" She stopped. "You look like someone worth paying attention to," Daniel said. "Which is different from beautiful, though I'd argue you're that too. Worth paying attention to is harder to achieve. It requires actually being someone. You are someone, Emily." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes stung. She would not cry in this man's studio. She had not cried in front of anyone since the night Nathan left, and she was not going to start now. "Okay," she said. "What happens next with the project?" The project moved faster than she anticipated. She threw herself into the photography side of it with everything she had. Daniel gave her 6 women to work with, 6 women with 6 different stories, 6 different faces, 6 different relationships with their own visibility. A woman of 62 who had been a professional dancer and had been told by her body and her industry that she was finished. A woman of 38 who had survived breast cancer and no longer recognized herself in the mirror. A woman of 45 who had immigrated from Ethiopia 15 years earlier and had spent those years becoming someone her adopted country could accept, and had somewhere along the way lost the version of herself her mother had raised. Emily photographed all of them. She photographed them the way Rosa had photographed her, without asking them to perform, without asking them to be anything other than exactly what they were, present in the room, present in the light. She sat with each woman for hours before she raised the camera. She listened. She asked questions. She let them talk about the things they had lost and the things they had found, and the difference between the person they had been told they were and the person they actually were. And then she photographed that difference. She had forgotten somewhere in the 10 years of being Nathan's wife that this was what she could do. Not just take pictures, not just compose frames and manage light. She could find the thing a person was trying to hide and hold it so gently, with such care, that they allowed it to be seen. She could do with a camera what the best kind of attention does, make someone feel that they are real, that they matter, that their story is worth the telling. "You have a gift," Daniel told her after she showed him the first round of photographs. "I don't say that lightly." "You said it about my bus stop woman," Emily reminded him. "I meant it then too." He was looking at the photographs of the 62-year-old dancer, a series of images that Emily privately thought were the best things she had taken in years. "But this is different. That was potential. This is mastery. Whatever you lost in the last 10 years, you haven't lost this. It was waiting for you." Emily wanted to believe him. She was learning slowly, and with great difficulty, to let herself believe things that felt good. She had spent so long in a house where good things were taken away or explained or undercut, that receiving them felt almost dangerous, like walking on ice you weren't sure would hold. But she was learning. She was also, in ways she hadn't quite expected, becoming part of a community. The photography center had become a kind of anchor for her weeks. She went 3 times, then 4 times, then nearly every day sometimes to work on the project, and sometimes simply to be around other people who cared about the same things she cared about. She started talking to other photographers, an older man named Victor, who shot street photography in Pilsen, and who made her laugh in a way she had almost forgotten people could make her laugh without agenda, without needing something from her. A young woman named Priya, who was getting her MFA, and who looked at Emily's work with a reverence that was entirely new and uncomfortable and wonderful. She started tentatively to go out for coffee after sessions. She started even more tentatively to talk about herself without editing. One evening after a long shoot, she was sitting with Priya and Victor and 2 others at a coffee shop near the center, and somehow the conversation turned the way conversations do in groups, where people are slowly becoming real to each other, to relationships, to the ones that had shaped them, to the ones they were still recovering from. Victor talked about his ex-wife with the particular warmth of someone who had processed their grief all the way through and come out the other side with something like acceptance. Priya talked about a relationship she had been in during her undergraduate years that had made her so small she had stopped eating properly, that she had built her entire MFA thesis around recovering from. And then everyone looked at Emily. She could feel it, the gentle expectation of people who had shared themselves and were waiting to see if she would too. She had 100 practiced responses she could have given. "I'm recently divorced. I'm figuring things out. It's complicated." Instead, she heard herself say, "My husband left me because he said I was ugly. He said I'd let myself go. He said he deserved better." She paused. "He had someone waiting downstairs in his car while he was telling me this." The table was silent. "What did you do?" Priya asked quietly. "I signed the papers," Emily said. "And then I found my camera." Victor raised his coffee cup. "To finding the camera," he said. Everyone raised their cups. Emily raised hers. It was a small moment, an ordinary moment at a coffee shop table with people she had known for less than 2 months. But something about it cracked something open in her, some last sealed room that had been closed since the night Nathan slid those papers across the kitchen table and told her she was no longer worth looking at. She went home that night and sat at her desk and looked at the photographs she had taken over the past 2 months, and for the first time she saw them not as proof that she could still function, not as evidence that Nathan was wrong, not as anything in relation to Nathan at all. She saw them as her own, entirely unapologetically her own. She opened her laptop and started writing. Not a project statement or an artist bio, just writing the way she had journaled when she was young, privately and without an audience. She wrote about the ironing board. She wrote about the camera in the closet. She wrote about the woman at the bus stop whose face was doing the thing Emily recognized. She wrote about standing in Rose's studio and feeling her body apologize. She wrote for 2 hours without stopping. When she was done, she read what she had written, and she realized it was a story, her story, not the one Nathan had written for her, not the one that ended with her invisible and quietly devastated on the other side of a marriage that had spent 10 years making her smaller. A different story, one that was just beginning. She saved the file. She named it "What I Found When He Left." She did not know yet that Daniel would read that document 3 months later and call her with a voice that was barely containing something that sounded like urgency. She did not know that the words she wrote that night, late and alone at her desk, would become the backbone of an article that would be read by more people than she could comprehend. She did not know any of that yet. She only knew that she was writing again, photographing again, feeling again, building something in the cleared space that Nathan's absence had left behind, the way a forest grows back after a fire, green and unashamed and more alive than before. And she knew something else. She was no longer apologizing, not with her body, not with her work, not with the particular careful smallness she had perfected over 10 years of being told she took up space wrong. She was done being sorry for existing. And when Daniel called her the next morning and said, "I want to talk to you about taking the project further," she did not say no. She did not hedge. She did not ask if she was sure she was the right person, if someone else might do it better, if the world was really ready for a story like hers. She said, "Tell me everything." Daniel's call came on a Tuesday morning early enough that Emily was still on her first cup of coffee, standing at her kitchen window in the gray February light with her notebook open on the counter beside her. "I need you to come in today," he said without preamble, without good morning, which was simply how Daniel communicated when something mattered to him. Small talk was for people who had time to waste. "Not this afternoon, this morning. Can you be here by 10? Emily looked at the clock. It was 7:42. "What happened?" "Nothing bad," he said. "Something very good, but I want to show you in person." She was there by 9:55. Daniel was already in the main studio space when she arrived, standing at the large work table he used for layouts, surrounded by printed photographs and his laptop, and 3 coffee cups in different stages of emptiness that suggested he had been there since very early in the morning. He looked up when she came in, and something moved across his face that she had not seen on him before. Not his usual focused calm, something more alive than that. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "Sit down." She sat. He turned the laptop to face her. On the screen was an email. She leaned forward to read it. It was from someone named Claire Whitmore, with an email address that ended in the domain of one of the largest independent media companies in the country. The email was 4 paragraphs long, and she read it twice before she looked up. "She wants to publish the project," Emily said. "Not just publish it," Daniel said. "She wants to feature it, full editorial spread. They're planning a special issue focused on women and identity, and she says..." He reached over and scrolled to the second paragraph. "She says the work is, and I'm quoting her directly, some of the most emotionally honest photography she has seen in years. She specifically mentions your photographs, by name." Emily read the sentence he was pointing to, her own name in a professional email from a major publication, next to the words, "emotionally honest and years." She also read the essay, Daniel said. Emily looked up sharply. "What essay?" "The one you wrote, what I found when he left." He held her gaze. "I hope you'll forgive me. I sent it to her without asking you first, because I had a feeling about it, and I have learned over 30 years to trust my feelings about things like this. She wants to include it alongside the photographs, your words, your images, your story." Emily sat very still. She thought about the night she had written that essay. Laid at her kitchen table, 2 cups of tea that had gone cold, writing without an audience or a destination, just writing the way she breathed because she had to, because something in her needed to be let out of the dark. She had not written it for anyone. She had certainly not written it for a major publication. "Daniel," she said carefully, "how many people read this publication?" he told her. The number was large enough that her brain did something involuntary, a kind of quiet refusal to fully process it. "I need a minute," she said. "Take 2, he said, and poured her a cup of coffee from the pot on the side table without asking. She sat with the number. She sat with the email. She sat with the image of Claire Whitmore somewhere in an office in New York, reading the essay Emily had written in her kitchen at midnight about ironing a shirt for a man who was already planning to leave her. And then she sat with the fear. Because the fear arrived immediately behind the wonder, the way it always does, the faithful shadow of anything that matters. The fear had Nathan's voice, which she was beginning to recognize as one of the most insidious things he had done to her, colonized the part of her brain where doubt lived and installed his voice there, so that even in his absence, even across the distance of a divorce and 2 months of rebuilding, she still heard him when she was afraid. "You've let yourself go. You're not the woman anyone wants to look at. You're ordinary Emily. You're fine, but you're ordinary. Who do you think you are?" She recognized the voice now. That was new. A month ago she would have heard it and believed it automatically. Now she could hear it and know with something not quite certainty, but approaching it, that it was not the truth. It was just Nathan. And Nathan, she was learning, had been wrong about a great many things. She looked at Daniel. "Okay," she said. He blinked. "Okay, meaning yes. Okay, meaning yes." He sat back in his chair, and for the first time since she had met him, Daniel Hayes looked genuinely relieved. "Good," he said, "because I already told Claire you'd say yes." Emily stared at him. "You told her before you asked me?" "I had a feeling," he said, entirely unapologetic. She shook her head, but she was smiling. The next 6 weeks were unlike anything Emily had experienced before. She had understood in an abstract way what it meant to work on something that was going somewhere. She had spent years as a photo editor, watching other people's work go through the process of being shaped and prepared and sent out into the world. But she had never been on this side of it, never been the person whose work was being prepared, whose story was being treated as something worth the telling. Claire Whitmore flew to Chicago in March. Emily had expected someone intimidating and received someone who was sharp and warm in equal measure, a woman in her late 40s who wore no-nonsense clothes and asked questions with the precision of someone who had been doing this long enough to know exactly what she was looking for and was not going to settle for approximations. They met at Daniel's studio. Claire shook Emily's hand, looked at the photographs laid out on the work table, and said nothing for 4 minutes. Emily counted. She had learned in the weeks since the project had started accelerating that the people worth trusting were the ones who could be quiet in front of something that deserved quiet. "The bus stop woman," Claire said, finally pointing to the photograph that had started everything. "Tell me about the moment you took this." Emily told her. She talked about the light and the angle and the expression and the things she had recognized in the woman's face, the decision being made behind the eyes, the pivot point between going forward and giving up. Claire listened without interrupting. "And you recognized it," Claire said when Emily finished, "because you were making the same decision yourself at the time." It was not a question. "Yes," Emily said. "That's what makes this work different," Claire said, not to Emily specifically, but to both of them, to the room, to the photographs. "You're not photographing these women from outside. You're photographing them from inside the same experience. That's extraordinarily rare, and it's exactly why this story needs to be told." She turned back to Emily. "I want to run your essay alongside the photographs. I want your face in this piece. I want readers to know who took these images and why and what it cost." Emily felt the familiar contraction in her chest, the old reflex. "My face," she repeated. "Your face," Claire confirmed. "The real one. No heavy editorial makeup, no significant retouching. You as you are, which is..." She looked at Emily for a moment with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades looking at images and deciding what mattered. "More than sufficient. Trust me," Joanne called that evening. Emily had been waiting to tell her until she had processed enough of it herself to be able to speak about it without her voice going strange, which took until approximately 8 o'clock at night, by which point she had walked around her apartment 14 times and made tea she didn't drink. "Joanne," she said when her friend picked up, "I need to tell you something." "Are you okay? You sound weird." "I'm fine. She stopped, started again. "A major publication wants to run my photographs and my essay and my face in a feature piece on women and identity." Silence. "Joanne." "I'm here," Joanne said. Her voice had gone very quiet. "I'm just Emily. Oh my God." "I know. Your face. In a magazine." "Don't say it like that." "I'm not saying it like anything. I'm saying it like your face in a magazine, Emily. Like the thing Nathan told you was not worth looking at is going to be in a magazine." Joanne's voice broke slightly at the edges. "Sorry, I told myself I wasn't going to cry." "Please don't cry," Emily said, her own voice going unsteady. "Because if you cry, then I'm going to cry, and I've held it together all day, and I really need to hold it together." "Okay," Joanne said. "I'm not crying, I'm so proud of you." A pause. "Has Nathan seen any of this yet?" "No," Emily said. "This isn't about Nathan." "I know," Joanne said, "but I'm just asking." "No," Emily repeated, "and I want to keep it that way for as long as possible. This is mine. I don't want his reaction to be part of it." Joanne was quiet for a moment. "You've changed," she said, not as an accusation, as an observation, the same kind of observation you make when a plant you thought might not make it through winter suddenly puts out new growth in March. I'm becoming who I always was, Emily said. I just forgot for a while. The photograph sessions for the feature piece happened over 2 weekends in late March. Rosa returned for the final portrait session, the one that would be used as the anchor image for the editorial. Emily trusted Rosa the way she trusted very few people in the world of image making, because Rosa had been the first person to notice her body apologizing and had asked her gently to stop. The morning of the shoot, Emily got a text message from an unknown number. She almost didn't open it. She had gotten good at not opening things from unknown numbers since the divorce, since the period of mutual friends sending careful check-in messages that were really reconnaissance missions on Nathan's behalf. But she opened it. The text said, "I heard you're doing something with a magazine. I think we should talk. Nathan." She stared at it for 20 seconds. Then she turned her phone face down on her dresser and finished getting ready for her shoot. She did not respond. Rosa noticed the tension in Emily's shoulders when she arrived at the studio that morning. "What happened?" Rosa asked, setting up her equipment with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this long enough to do it with half her attention. "Nothing important," Emily said. Rosa looked at her. Rosa had the kind of eyes that made it very difficult to offer a partial truth and have it accepted as the whole one. "Tell me the actual thing." Emily told her about the text. Rosa set down what she was holding. "What did you say back?" "Nothing." Rosa nodded slowly. "Good." She picked her equipment back up. "Hold that feeling, the one where you decided he didn't deserve an answer. Hold it all morning." Emily held it. The photographs Rosa took that morning were different from the ones she had taken in February, more assured. Not because Emily had arranged herself better or performed confidence, she didn't feel, but because something had actually shifted underneath something fundamental and load-bearing, the way foundations shift after an earthquake, not crumbling, but settling into a new and more stable configuration. When Rosa showed her the test shots on the back of the camera, Emily looked at her own face, and for the first time in longer than she could calculate, she did not immediately begin cataloging the flaws. She just looked, and what she saw was someone she recognized. Daniel called her that afternoon with the final confirmation from Claire. The issue was locked. The photographs were in, the essay would run in full, and then he said the thing he had been building toward, she could hear it in the careful way he had been moving through the sentence, the way you move toward something fragile. "Claire wants to discuss cover consideration," Daniel said. Emily's hand tightened on the phone. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Daniel said carefully, "that your portrait is being considered for the cover of the issue." The apartment was very quiet. "The cover," she said. "The cover," he confirmed. "Daniel." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I'm not a model. I'm not a celebrity. I'm a 45-year-old divorced photographer from Chicago whose ex-husband told her she was ugly." "I know exactly who you are," Daniel said. "So does Claire. That's precisely why your face is being considered for the cover. Because the whole point of this issue is that the women we overlook are the ones worth seeing most." She sat down on the floor of her hallway. She did not plan to sit on the floor. Her legs simply made the decision without consulting her. "I'm sitting on the floor," she told Daniel. "That's fine," he said. "Take your time." She sat on the floor of her hallway for a while and thought about a kitchen table with divorce papers on it. She thought about Nathan's voice saying, "You're not attractive anymore," the particular coldness of it, the casualness, the way he had delivered a sentence that would take her years to dismantle, with the same tone he might have used to observe that it was going to rain. She thought about ironing his shirts. She thought about the camera in the closet. She thought about this woman at the bus stop who was making a decision behind her eyes. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay meaning yes. Okay meaning if they want to put my face on the cover, I am not going to be the person who says no. Not anymore." Nathan texted again 2 days later. This time the message was longer. "Emily, I've been hearing things through mutual friends. I don't know exactly what's going on with you, but I want you to know that I've been thinking about us a lot lately, and I think I made a mistake. I'd really like to talk if you're open to it. I miss you." She read it standing in the photography center, in between a workshop session she was now co-facilitating with Daniel, because in the months since she had walked through that door for the first time holding her camera like a shield, she had somehow become someone the center wanted to keep. She showed the text to Keisha, who was passing by with an armful of folders. Keisha read it. Her expression went through 3 distinct phases in quick succession. "He misses you," she said finally. "He's heard something," Emily said, "through mutual friends. He doesn't know what yet, but he's heard enough to be nervous." "So he misses you suddenly," Keisha said. "Convenient, isn't it?" Keisha handed the folders to someone passing and looked at Emily directly. "What are you going to do?" Emily put her phone in her pocket. "Keep working," she said. She went back into the workshop. The essay went through 3 rounds of edits with Claire's team. Each round, Emily expected them to soften something, to take the sharpest edges off the things she had written to protect the publication from something too honest, too raw, too specifically painful. Publications, in her experience as a photo editor, preferred a certain managed version of emotion. Feeling at a comfortable distance, vulnerability that had been sanitized for mass consumption. Claire's team did not do that. Every note they sent back to her pushed in the opposite direction, more specific, more honest. The detail about ironing the shirt, keep it, make it longer, let it breathe. The moment she signed the divorce papers, don't rush past it. The camera in the closet, this is the heart of the piece, expand it. They wanted the real thing. Emily rewrote and rewrote and rewrote. She had not written this much or this honestly since college, since before the part of her life where she had learned to make herself smaller in every medium, including language. She sent the final draft to Claire on a Thursday night in April at 11:45 at night from her kitchen table. Then she sat in the quiet of her apartment and did something she had not done in months. She opened Nathan's social media profile. She did not do it to hurt herself. She was past that particular form of self-destruction. She did it the way you sometimes return to a place that hurt you to confirm that it no longer has the power it once did. To check in on your own healing the way you press gently on a bruise to see if it still stings. Nathan's profile was still active. He was still posting. There were photographs from a ski trip he had taken in February. Photographs from what appeared to be a company event. A few images from restaurants she recognized. Serena was in some of them, not tagged but visible. She looked young and pretty and entirely unaware that she was standing in the wreckage of another woman's 10 years. Emily felt, and this surprised her, almost nothing. Not nothing in the numb way, not the flat effect of someone who had simply shut down, but the clean, spacious nothing of someone who has genuinely moved past a thing. She looked at Nathan's photographs the way you look at an old address written in a notebook, acknowledging that you used to live there, confirming that you no longer do. She closed the app. She opened her photography folder instead and looked at the images she had taken over the past 3 months. There were hundreds of them now. She scrolled through slowly. The bus stop woman, the dancer, the cancer survivor, the immigrant, the photograph Rosa had taken of Emily herself, the one Daniel had said would be considered for the cover, in which Emily was standing in morning light, with no arrangement on her face at all, just presence, just the fact of herself. She stared at that photograph for a long time. It had taken her 10 years and 1 devastating night at a kitchen table, and 3 months of finding her way back to a camera to look like that. Not glamorous, not performing, just entirely there. She wondered, not for the first time, but with a new quality of wondering what would have happened if Nathan had never left, if he had stayed, if the cruelty had continued in its quiet, calibrated, domestic way for another 10 years, whether she would have found the camera eventually anyway, or whether it would have sat in that closet until it stopped being a camera and became simply an object, inert and forgotten, a monument to the woman she had decided not to become. She thought probably not. She thought she might have stayed small indefinitely. She thought Nathan might have been, in the most painful and ironic way possible, exactly what she needed. Not his love, which had not in the end been love at all, but his leaving. His particular cruelty in the leaving. The thing that had been so unambiguously, undeniably wrong, that she could not even in her worst moments of doubt convince herself that she deserved it. He had told her she was ugly. He had someone waiting downstairs, and those 2 facts held together had been just clear enough to cut through the 10 years of managed self-doubt and show her something true: she had not been failing Nathan. Nathan had been failing her, systematically, deliberately, and for a very long time. Her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, expecting Joanne or possibly Daniel, with a late-night thought about the project. It was Nathan again. "Emily, I really need you to call me. Please. I think we made a mistake and I want to fix it." She looked at the message for a moment. Then she set the phone down and went to bed. She lay in the dark of her apartment and listened to the radiator knock and thought about the word we. We made a mistake, as if the divorce had been a mutual decision, as if the signing of those papers had been equally weighted, equally chosen, as if the person who had papers already prepared a lawyer, already consulted a woman, already waiting downstairs, was equally responsible with the person who had been standing at an ironing board, making coffee for someone who had already decided to leave. We. She fell asleep before she could finish the thought. 2 weeks later, Claire's editorial assistant called to confirm that the decision had been made. Emily's portrait was the cover. The assistant was professional and warm, and used words like thrilled and honored and extraordinary, and Emily said thank you, and yes, and of course, and I understand, and when she hung up the phone, she sat completely still for 30 seconds. Then she called Daniel. He picked up on the first ring. "They told you," he said. He already knew. "They told me," she confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him in his studio, the faint background sounds of a space she had come to know well over the past months. "I want to tell you something," Daniel said, "and I want you to hear it properly, not just let it go past you." "Okay," she said. "When you walked into my studio that first day," he said, "with your portfolio folder and your coffee and your camera, you were holding like a shield. I could see the whole story in 5 minutes. Not because you told it to me, because it was in the photographs. The way you had been looking at women and finding them extraordinary precisely because someone had spent years telling you that you were ordinary." He paused. "I've been in this industry for 30 years. I've worked with photographers who were technically exceptional. I've worked with maybe 4 or 5 in my entire career who could do what you do, which is make someone feel seen in a way that has nothing to do with the surface of things. You are one of those people, not because of what you've been through, but because of who you are underneath it." Emily pressed her hand over her eyes. She held it together, barely. "Thank you," she said, "for not letting me say no." "Thank you," he said, "for eventually saying yes." The issue went to print on a Friday in May. Emily did not see the final product until Monday morning, when Daniel called her at 7 a.m., sounding more awake than any person had a right to sound at that hour. "Go to a newsstand," he said. "Now, right now, get dressed and go." She went. She walked 3 blocks to the nearest newsstand in the early morning, in the specific Chicago cold of a May morning that hadn't decided yet whether it was winter or spring, with her coat only half buttoned and her hair not entirely dealt with, and she stood in front of the magazine rack. And there she was, her own face large and clear and entirely unashamed, looking back at her from the cover of a magazine that 500,000 people would hold in their hands this month. Not a model's face, not a performed face, not the face that Nathan had looked at across a dinner table and found insufficient. Just her face, real and present and entirely there. She stood in front of that newsstand for a long time. A woman passing behind her paused and looked at the cover, then looked at Emily, then looked at the cover again. "Is that you?" the woman asked. Emily looked at her. At the stranger's face open with surprise, and something warmer than surprise. "Yes," Emily said. The woman smiled. "You look incredible." Emily looked back at the cover. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it in more ways than one. She bought 3 copies. She walked home with them under her arm in the May morning that was beginning finally to feel more like spring than winter. She did not think about Nathan. She did not need to. She put 1 copy of the magazine on her desk beside the photograph of the old man and the pigeons. She put 1 on her kitchen table, and the 3rd one she mailed without a note to her mother. Patricia called 4 hours later and did not speak for the first 12 seconds of the call, which was the longest Emily had ever known her mother to go without words. "My daughter," Patricia said finally. Just that. My daughter. Like a sentence that contained everything. Emily stood in her kitchen holding the phone. "Hi, Mom," she said, and then she let herself cry. Not the desperate crying of the parking lot or the 2 a.m. silences, not the grief kind, the other kind, the kind that comes when you have survived something long and hard and arrived somewhere you did not know existed when you started the journey, and the realizing of it moves through you all at once, like a wave. She cried for a good 2 minutes. Her mother did not tell her to stop, did not say it was okay, did not offer comfort in the form of words, because Patricia Carter had always understood that some feelings need to run their course without intervention. She just stayed on the line. When Emily was done, she wiped her face and laughed a little at herself. "What happens now?" Patricia asked. Emily looked at the copy of the magazine on her kitchen table, at her own face unashamed and present and entirely hers. "Now," she said, "it goes out into the world." And somewhere in Chicago, in a city that had watched a woman walk quietly through the wreckage of everything she had been told she was, the world was already beginning to notice. The issue hit newsstands on a Monday. By Wednesday, Emily's phone had stopped being a phone and become something closer to a live wire. It started slowly enough. A few messages from people she knew, former colleagues from the trade publication, distant friends she hadn't spoken to in years, the woman from her building who always held the elevator. They all said variations of the same thing. "I saw you. I read your story. I didn't know. You look incredible. I'm so proud of you." By Thursday morning, Claire's assistant called to tell her the piece was the most read item on their digital platform since they had launched it 4 years earlier. Emily was standing at her kitchen counter eating toast when she got that call. She put down the toast. She stood very still for a moment, the way you stand when the ground shifts unexpectedly and you need a second to confirm it's still under your feet. "How many people?" she asked. Claire's assistant told her. Emily put the toast in the trash because she was no longer hungry and sat down at her kitchen table and stared at the copy of the magazine she had placed there a week ago. 500,000 print readers, and now digitally a number that was growing by the hour. Her essay, her photographs, her face, that many people. She called Daniel. "I know," he said before she could speak. "Claire just called me too. Emily, I want you to understand what's happening. This isn't just a successful article. This is a moment, the kind that doesn't happen very often, and when it does, you have to be ready for it." "Ready for what exactly?" she asked. "For what comes next," he said. "Because things are about to move very quickly, and I want to make sure you're standing on solid ground when they do." She appreciated that. The warning, the care behind it. Daniel had been in this industry long enough to know that moments like this had a way of arriving, like floods, fast, disorienting, beautiful, and dangerous in equal measure. She spent Thursday returning messages. Not all of them, there were too many now arriving from directions she hadn't anticipated, strangers who had found her through the article and tracked down her email address or her barely active photography website, which had been sitting dormant for 3 years, with a handful of sample images and a contact form she had never expected anyone to use. By Thursday evening, the contact form had received over 400 submissions. She read them for 2 hours. They were from women, almost all of them. Women of every age, from their early 20s to their late 70s, writing in the particular tone of someone who has been holding something for a long time and has finally found a container large enough to put it in. They wrote about marriages that had made them small, about voices that had lived inside their heads for years, voices that sounded like husbands, like fathers, like bosses, like the culture at large, telling them they were not enough, not attractive enough, not young enough, not the right version of themselves to deserve to be seen. They wrote, "I thought I was the only one." They wrote, "I recognized myself in your photographs before I even read the words." They wrote, "I put down the magazine and called my daughter and read her your essay over the phone." One woman, 73 years old, wrote that she had kept a camera in a storage closet for 40 years, that she had read Emily's essay 3 times, that she was taking the camera out this weekend. Emily read that message 4 times. Then she went into her bathroom and let herself cry for exactly 4 minutes, and then washed her face and went back to her desk. She was still at her desk at midnight when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, but with a New York area code. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something stopped her. She picked up. "Is this Emily Carter?" The voice was female, professional, moving at the pace of someone whose time was genuinely limited. "This is Andrea Reeves. I'm a senior editor at Vogue." The kitchen was very quiet. "Yes," Emily said carefully. "This is Emily Carter." "I've been following the response to your piece since Monday," Andrea said. "I read your essay on Tuesday night and I've been thinking about it since. I'd like to set up a call with you and our editor-in-chief this week if you're available. We're planning something and I think you might be part of it." Emily kept her voice steady through an act of will she would later describe to Joanne as genuinely heroic. "What kind of something?" "I'd rather discuss it on the call," Andrea said. "But I'll say this much, we're doing an issue about women who have rewritten their own stories. And yours is the most powerful version of that story I've read in a long time." After the call ended, Emily sat without moving for approximately 90 seconds. Then she called Joanne. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Try me," Joanne said. "At this point, I will believe anything about you," Emily told her. Joanne made a sound that was not quite a word. Then, "Vogue called you." "Yes." "Vogue, the magazine." "Yes, Joanne, the magazine." "Emily." Joanne's voice went very quiet and very careful, the way it did when she was feeling something too large for her normal register. "Do you understand what's happening?" "I'm beginning to," Emily said. This is the kind of thing that doesn't happen, right? Like statistically, to actual normal people living actual normal lives, this kind of thing just doesn't. "I know," Emily said. "And Nathan." Joanne stopped herself. "I'm not going to make this about Nathan." "Thank you. I'm just saying, the man told you that you were ugly, and now Vogue is calling." "Joanne." I know. Not about Nathan." "Okay, tell me everything she said." The call with Andrea Reeves and Vogue's editor-in-chief happened on Friday morning, 48 hours after the initial contact. Emily took the call from Daniel's studio because she wanted to be somewhere that felt like solid ground, somewhere that had held her through the process of becoming this version of herself, and Daniel's studio had been that place more than anywhere else over the past 4 months. Daniel sat across the room and did not listen. He put on headphones and worked on something on his laptop, but his presence in the room was enough. She did not feel alone. The call lasted 40 minutes. By the end of it, Emily had agreed in principle to be part of Vogue's upcoming special issue on women and reinvention. Not as a photographer for hire, not as a subject in someone else's project. As a collaborator, her photographs, her essay adapted and expanded, and her portrait shot by one of their photographers in New York for what Andrea called cover consideration for the August issue. When the call ended, Emily set her phone on Daniel's work table and looked at it for a moment as if she expected it to do something else. "How did it go?" Daniel asked, pulling off his headphones. Emily looked up at him. "They want me in New York," she said, "for a potential Vogue cover." Daniel Hayes, who had spent 30 years in the creative industry and had long ago claimed to be immune to being surprised by it, looked at her for a moment with something uncomplicated and genuine on his face. "Good," he said. "Good," she repeated. "That's all you've got. What do you want me to say?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "Something more than good." He leaned back in his chair and looked at her with the same attention he brought to photographs he considered worth his time. "When you walked in here 4 months ago holding that camera like it was something you'd stolen," he said, "I knew 2 things. First, you could actually see the way almost nobody can. And second, something had been working very hard for a very long time to make you forget that." He held her gaze. "Good means that the thing that was working against you lost. That's actually everything." She flew to New York on a Tuesday in June. She had not been to New York in 11 years. The last time had been a trip with Nathan for a conference he was attending, a trip in which she had spent most of her time waiting in hotel rooms and attending dinners where she was Nathan's wife, a category that required almost nothing from her except presence and appropriate conversation. This time, she was not anyone's wife. She was Emily Carter, photographer, whose work had been read by more people than she could comfortably think about, whose face was already familiar to a significant number of those people, who was walking through JFK Airport with her camera bag on her shoulder and a portfolio case in her hand, and a reservation at a hotel she had booked herself. The Vogue offices were exactly what she had expected, and nothing like what she had imagined. She had expected glamour, and there was some of that, the particular curated aesthetic of a place that has spent decades thinking about what things look like. But what she hadn't expected was the work. The visible, serious, unrelenting work. People moving through corridors with the focused energy of people who cared enormously about what they were doing and had no time to perform that caring for an audience. Andrea Reeves met her in the lobby. She was taller than Emily had pictured, with the brisk warmth of someone who had been doing this long enough to know the difference between people who had something real and people who were performing having something real. "I'm glad you came," Andrea said, shaking her hand. "Let me take you upstairs." The meeting with the editor-in-chief lasted 90 minutes. Her name was Margaret Holt, and she had been editing Vogue for 12 years, and she was the kind of woman who made you feel in the first 5 minutes of being in her presence that you were being assessed with total precision, and that the assessment was entirely fair. She asked Emily about the project, about the women she had photographed, about the essay, about the specific quality of attention that had made the work land the way it did, and then she asked the question that Emily had not been expecting. "Tell me about your marriage," Margaret said. Emily looked at her. "The article covered that." "The article covered the outline," Margaret said. "I want to understand the actual experience, what it did to the way you see things. Because that's what I see in your work. Not just talent, which is real and significant, but a particular quality of attention that comes from someone who has been looked past for a long time. That kind of attention is rare. It's also painful to have acquired. I want to understand the cost." Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about how to answer that. She had told the story in the essay. She had told it to Daniel and Rosa and Joanne and Claire and her mother. Each time she told it, it shifted slightly the way any story shifts as the teller grows more distance from it. "He didn't see me," she said finally, "not because I was invisible, because he had decided what I was in the first year of our marriage, and he never looked again. And the way you adapt to that when it's someone you love, when it's someone you live with every day, is you start to look through his eyes. You start to evaluate yourself the way he evaluates you. And slowly you stop being a full person and start being a performance of the version of yourself he's decided to tolerate." The room was quiet, and when he left, Emily continued, "The cruelest part was not the leaving. The cruelest part was what he said when he left, because he said what he had been thinking for years. And when you finally hear the thing that's been underneath the surface of your daily life, there is something almost clarifying about it. You stop wondering. You stop hoping you misread the signals. You know." She paused. "And knowing, as terrible as it is the beginning of being able to do something about it." Margaret looked at her for a moment. "That," she said quietly, "is exactly why we want your face on the cover." Emily flew back to Chicago on Thursday. She was in the air somewhere over Ohio when Nathan called. She saw his name on her phone screen when she landed and turned off airplane mode, and she stared at it with the particular feeling of something that used to have enormous power, demonstrating that it no longer does. Like standing in front of a house you grew up in, that has been sold and repainted, still recognizable, no longer yours, no longer capable of making you feel the same things it once could. He had left a voicemail. She listened to it in the back of a cab on the way home from O'Hare. His voice was different from the voice she remembered from the kitchen table, from the night of the divorce papers. That voice had been cold and decided. This voice was careful, managed. The voice of a man who had spent time preparing what he was going to say. "Emily," the voicemail said, "I know I've reached out a few times and you haven't responded, and I understand that. I've been seeing things about the article, about your work, and I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I know I don't have the right to say that, but I am, and I've been thinking a lot about what happened between us, and I think I was wrong. About a lot of things. I think I'd really like the chance to talk if you're ever open to it. I miss you, Emily. I miss what we had. Please call me back." The cab moved through Chicago traffic. Emily looked out the window at the city moving past. She had imagined in the early weeks after the divorce what it would feel like to hear Nathan say he was wrong. She had imagined it with the same desperate secret hope that she imagined most things in those early weeks, the particular fantasy of the person who has been wronged, in which the wrongdoer eventually comprehends the full scale of what they have done and arrives humbled at the door. She had imagined it would feel like vindication. What it actually felt like was nothing in particular. Not nothing in a numb way, nothing in a resolved way. The way a question feels when you have found the answer, not exciting anymore, not urgent, just settled. She did not call him back. She went home. She made tea. She sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop and answered 43 emails from women who had read her essay and needed to tell someone their stories, because the particular cruelty of feeling invisible is that it makes you feel like your story doesn't deserve to be told, and Emily had apparently staggeringly made several thousand women feel that it did. She read every email. She answered as many as she could. At 10 o'clock that night, Joanne appeared at her door with wine and takeout from the Thai place 2 blocks over, which was their standard operating procedure for significant occasions. "Tell me everything," Joanne said, pushing past her into the apartment. "New York, Vogue, all of it." Emily told her everything. Joanne listened, the way she always listened, which was with her whole body leaning forward slightly, her food going cold in front of her because she was too focused on the words to eat. "And Nathan called," Emily added at the end. Joanne went very still. "What did he say? That he's proud of me, that he thinks he was wrong, that he misses me." Joanne was quiet for a moment. And nothing," Emily said. "I didn't call him back." Joanne exhaled. "Good. He said he misses what we had," Emily said. "And I keep thinking about that. What we had. What was it actually, Joanne? Because from here it looks like 10 years of me making myself smaller so he could feel larger. That's not something I miss." Joanne reached across the table and put her hand over Emily's. "You know what I've noticed," Joanne said. "Over the past 5 months, the way you talk about yourself has completely changed. You used to qualify everything. I used to be decent at photography. I might have some kind of eye for this. Now you just say things, straight out, like they're true, because they are true." Emily looked at her. "Is that new?" "It's not new," Joanne said. "It's old. It's the you I knew before Nathan. It's the you I missed for 10 years. 2 weeks later, the Vogue shoot happened. The photographer was a man named James Park, who was in his 40s and had shot more covers than Emily could count, and who approached his work with a precision that reminded her of Daniel, the same quality of full attention, the same understanding that the most interesting thing in any photograph was always the truth of the person in it. He did not ask her to perform. He did not ask her to be beautiful in any conventional sense of the word. He asked her to think about something real while he worked. "What do you think about?" he asked. "Right now, when you think about your life, what's the feeling?" She thought about it honestly. "Like I've been in a house for a long time," she said slowly, with all the windows painted over, "and someone finally opened them, and I can't stop looking outside." James Park looked at her over the camera. "Hold that," he said, and he took the photograph. She did not see the final selection until 3 weeks later, when Andrea sent her a digital file with a brief note. "We chose the one from the second hour. You'll know why when you see it." Emily opened the file. She sat at her kitchen desk in the apartment she had moved into with her radiator and her brick wall window and her lamp from college and the life she had built in the cleared space that Nathan had left behind. She looked at the photograph. It was the one from the moment she had been talking about the windows. Her face turned very slightly as if she were about to look at something just outside the frame, something she had been waiting a long time to see. Her expression was not arranged, not performed, not the careful neutral she had learned to wear in Nathan's presence, not the quiet diminishment of a woman who had spent years making herself easier to overlook. She looked like someone who had just remembered who she was. She stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Daniel. "They sent me the image," she said. "I know," he said. "Andrea called me. I know," she said. "You okay?" She thought about how to answer that. She thought about the ironing board and the camera in the closet, and the woman at the bus stop, and the floor of her hallway where she had sat when she found out the magazine wanted her cover. She thought about Nathan's voicemail in the cab from O'Hare, the careful managed voice saying he was proud of her, and the feeling of nothing in particular that it had produced. She thought about the 73-year-old woman with the camera in the closet, who was taking it out this weekend. "Yes," she said. "I'm okay. I'm more than okay." "Good," Daniel said. And this time she didn't ask for more than that because she understood now what he meant by it. The Vogue issue went to print in late July. Distribution began the first week of August. On a Monday morning in airports and bookstores and coffee shops and supermarket checkouts and doctors' waiting rooms and newsstands across the country, people reached for a magazine. And they saw Emily Carter's face. Not because she was a model, not because she was famous, not because someone had decided she was conventionally beautiful and worth displaying, because she was real. Because she had been through something real and had come out the other side not pretending otherwise and had looked at a camera with the exact face of a woman who has just opened all the windows in a house she had been locked inside for too long. And across America, in all of those places, people stopped. They looked, and they recognized her. Not necessarily her specifically, not her name or her story, not yet, not until they read the words inside, but the face itself. The expression, the particular quality of a woman who has decided finally and without apology to take up the space she was always entitled to. They recognized that because they had felt it, or they had wanted to feel it, or they knew someone who needed to feel it, and they were going to bring this magazine home to her. Emily did not know that Monday morning that any of this was happening. She was in her studio, her own studio now, a space she had rented 2 months ago, with money from the project and the article, and 2 workshops she had begun running for women who wanted to learn photography, and had almost without intending to created a small but growing community of women who showed up on Tuesday evenings and learned to look at things differently. She was editing photographs when Keisha called. "You need to check your phone," Keisha said. "I'm in the middle of something." "Emily." Keisha's voice had the particular quality of someone who is trying to remain calm about something that is not calm. "Check your phone." Emily checked her phone. The notifications were, there was no other word for it, extraordinary. Her photography website, which had been receiving steady traffic since the first article had crashed under the volume of visitors attempting to access it. Her email inbox, which she had been managing carefully and consistently for weeks, had received 217 new messages since 6 that morning. Her name was being mentioned according to the numbers her phone was attempting to show her thousands of times across social media platforms she barely used. She called Daniel. "The issue dropped," he said. "I can see that. How are you feeling?" She looked around her studio, at the photographs on the walls, at the equipment she had bought herself, the lights and the backdrops and the laptop and the editing software purchased with money she had earned doing work she had chosen, at the small whiteboard near the door where she had written months ago in dry erase marker the schedule for her Tuesday evening workshops, which now had a waiting list. "I feel like myself," she said, "which is the most extraordinary feeling I've ever had." Daniel was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. "Then everything worked out exactly right," he said. She was still at her studio at 7 that evening, going through emails and making notes for a response strategy that would allow her to honor the volume of response without losing the quality of attention she wanted to bring to each person, when her phone rang one more time. "Unknown number." She answered it. "Emily," said a voice she recognized immediately, even after months, even changed as it was by something she couldn't quite name, something that sounded, she thought, like the specific discomfort of a man who has just seen everywhere he looks, evidence of something he catastrophically misjudged. Nathan. She had known he would call. She had been expecting it somewhere in the background of everything, the way you expect rain when the sky has been that particular shade of gray all day. "I saw it," he said. "The cover." She said nothing. "Emily," he said, I don't even know where to start." "Then don't," she said quietly. "I need to talk to you. I need you to hear me out. I made a—" "Nathan," she said. He stopped. Her voice had not been sharp or cold. It had been something simpler than that. Certain. The voice of someone standing on ground that is absolutely solid, speaking across a distance that has become, over the months, since a kitchen table and a signed document and a camera in a closet, impossible to cross. "I know what you're going to say," she said, "and I want you to know that I understand. I think you mean it. I think looking at the cover you genuinely feel something. Regret, loss, maybe even something close to grief." She paused. "But I need you to understand something in return. You didn't underestimate me, Nathan. That would imply you assessed me and came up short. You never assessed me. You never really looked. For 10 years I stood right in front of you, and you looked past me every single day. And an apology, however sincere, can't give back what that cost." The line was quiet. "What can I do?" he said finally. "Nothing," she said. Not with cruelty, not with satisfaction, just with the simple, clean truth of it. "There's nothing to do. It's already done. And I'm okay. I'm more than okay. I need you to hear that because I think part of why you're calling is guilt. And I don't want to be your guilt, Nathan. I have my own life. I have my own work. I have my own story, and it doesn't need you in it anymore." He was silent for a long moment. "You're different," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "I am." She said goodbye. She ended the call. She set the phone on her work table in the studio she had built from nothing in the space where Nathan's opinion of her used to live, and she sat for a moment in the particular quiet of a thing that has been completed. Not healed exactly. Healing was ongoing the way healing always is. but completed. The chapter with Nathan in it, not the chapter of her life, but the chapter where his voice was the loudest thing in the room. That chapter was done. She looked at the whiteboard with the Tuesday evening schedule. She looked at the photographs on the walls. She looked at the camera bag hanging by the door, packed and ready, because she had a shoot tomorrow morning, a new subject for a new project. She was developing a woman of 68 who had raised 4 children and put her own ambitions on hold for 40 years, and had recently quietly decided it was her turn. Emily knew exactly how to photograph that story, because she had lived it. She turned off the studio lights. She locked the door. She walked out into the August evening with her camera bag on her shoulder and her face turned toward whatever was coming next, and she did not look back. The morning after she hung up on Nathan, Emily woke up at 5:45 without an alarm. She lay in the dark of her bedroom for a moment, listening. The radiator had stopped knocking weeks ago, the building super had finally fixed it in June, and the silence it left behind had taken some getting used to. She had grown fond of that knocking in the strange way you grow fond of the imperfections of a place that has held you through something hard. But the silence was good too. The silence was the sound of things working the way they were supposed to. She got up, made coffee, stood at her window with the mug in both hands, while the city below her began its slow transition from night to morning, the particular shade of blue that Chicago wore in the hour before the sun committed to rising. She thought about Nathan's voice on the phone, the way it had sounded. She had replayed the call once after she got home, not out of longing, but out of a kind of clinical curiosity, the way you examine something under glass to understand it better. What she heard listening again was a man who had genuinely not anticipated this outcome, not because he was stupid, but because he had at some fundamental level believed what he told her. He had believed she was ordinary. He had believed she was finished becoming. He had believed in the way people believe things they have never bothered to examine, that the version of Emily he had decided upon in the early years of their marriage was the only version that existed or ever would. He had been so certain, and certainty, Emily had learned, was sometimes just the loudest form of wrong. She finished her coffee and picked up her camera bag and left for the shoot. Her subject that morning was a woman named Frances Okafor, 68 years old, former high school principal, mother of 4, grandmother of 7. She had spent 41 years running institutions, managing people, solving problems with the particular competence of someone who had never been allowed the luxury of falling apart in public. She had put every creative impulse she ever had painting, writing the deep and serious interest in textile art that she had carried since childhood into a drawer she had been meaning to open for 4 decades. Her youngest daughter had sent Emily an email the week the first article ran. "My mother read your piece and cried for 20 minutes," the email said. "She hasn't cried in front of us in 15 years. She said she recognized something. I think she needs to be photographed. I think she needs someone to look at her the way you look at people in your work." Emily had written back within the hour. Frances met her at the door of her home with the brisk hospitality of a woman who has been hosting people her whole life and is so practiced at it that warmth has become structural load-bearing, as natural as breathing. "You're younger than I expected," Frances said, looking her over with frank appraisal. "You're exactly what I expected," Emily said. Frances raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "Someone who has been taking care of everyone else for so long that being taken care of feels foreign." Frances stared at her for a moment. Then she laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere low and unguarded. "Come in," she said. "I'll make tea." They talked for 2 hours before Emily raised the camera. This was her process, now refined over months of working with women whose stories lived beneath the surface of their faces. She had learned that the photographs came alive in direct proportion to how much of the person she understood before she started shooting. Not their biography, not the facts of their lives, the interior geography, the rooms they kept locked, the windows they had stopped looking out of. Frances talked about her mother, who had been a seamstress in Lagos, and who could make anything from nothing, and whose hands, Frances said, were the most extraordinary things she had ever seen. She talked about coming to America at 22 with a suitcase and an acceptance letter, and the particular kind of courage that looks from the outside exactly like ordinary determination. She talked about meeting her husband Marcus, who had died 6 years ago, and whose absence was still, she said, a physical thing, like a piece of furniture removed from a room, and the room never quite adjusting to the space. She talked about the textile art, the drawer. I tell myself every year, Frances said. This is the year I open the drawer, and then something comes up. A grandchild needs something. A daughter is having a hard time. My son calls from Seattle, and he's overwhelmed at work, and he needs me to talk him through it. She paused. I am very good at being needed. I am not very good at the other thing. At needing, Emily said. At wanting, Frances corrected quietly. Needing feels too raw, but wanting something for myself, just for myself, not because it serves anyone else, that feels almost selfish, after all this time. Emily raised the camera. Frances looked at her. The drawer, Emily said gently. Think about what's in the drawer. The photographs she took of Frances that morning would later be described in a profile in an arts publication the following spring as among the most significant portrait work produced in the past decade. Emily would read that description sitting at her kitchen table with her second cup of coffee, and she would feel the particular discomfort of praise that is difficult to absorb, and she would call Daniel, and he would say exactly what he always said when she called him with something she didn't know what to do with. Believe it, he would say, just believe it. But that was later. That morning, standing in Frances Okafor's living room with her camera, Emily didn't think about anything except what she was seeing through the lens. The 68-year-old face of a woman thinking about a drawer full of 40 years of postponed wanting. The particular way that thought moved through Frances's expression, not sadness exactly, but something more complicated. Recognition. The moment of fully understanding for the first time how long something has waited. Emily took the photograph. She knew immediately that it was the one. After the shoot, Frances walked her to the door. Can I ask you something? Frances said. Of course. Your article. I read it 4 times. Frances looked at her with the direct attention of someone who has spent 40 years evaluating people and knows exactly what she's doing. The man who told you that you were ugly, do you hate him? Emily considered the question honestly. She had been asked versions of it before in interviews and in the emails from women who read her work. Do you hate him? Are you angry? What do you feel? No, she said. I did for a while. That feels important to say. I did feel it. Anger is real and it belongs. But hate requires you to keep someone in the center of your attention, and I stopped being able to afford that. She paused. He took up enough of my years. I'm not giving him any more. Frances nodded slowly. My mother used to say something, in Yoruba. It translates roughly as a man who cannot see the sun does not make the sun less bright. Emily stood with that for a moment. I'm going to think about that for a long time, she said. Frances smiled. Good. She squeezed Emily's hand before she let go. Come back and photograph me again, when I've opened the drawer. I will, Emily said. I absolutely will. The gallery show opened on the second Friday of September. It had been Daniel's idea, and then Claire's, and then somehow in the space of 6 weeks it had become a real thing, happening in a real gallery space in River North, a venue with good light and high ceilings, and the kind of understated credibility that the Chicago art community took seriously. The show was called What I Found When He Left. Not just Emily's photographs, not a solo exhibition in the traditional sense, the work of the women she had been photographing for the past 8 months, alongside the photographs Rosa had taken of Emily herself, alongside the 6 women from the original Women Who Found Themselves Again project, alongside Frances and a dozen others, including, and this had required a separate conversation and a great deal of gentle persistence, the bus stop woman. Her name, Emily had discovered 2 months earlier, was Denise Walters, 47 years old, recovering from a divorce of her own as it happened 18 months along in the particular process of rebuilding that Emily knew intimately. She had found Emily through the article, recognized herself in the description of the photograph Emily had written about in the essay, and sent a message through the website contact form. I think I might be the woman at the bus stop, the message said. If so, I'd like to know what I looked like. Emily had shown her the photograph. Denise had looked at it for a long time. I look like I'm deciding something, Denise said. You are, Emily said. Were you? Yes, Denise said. I was deciding whether to go back to my apartment and call my sister, or whether to just keep walking. A pause. I kept walking. What happened? I walked for 3 hours. I ended up at the lake. I sat there until dark. She looked at the photograph again. And then I called my sister. Emily put the bus stop photograph at the entrance of the gallery. It was the first thing people saw when they walked in. The opening night brought more people than the gallery had anticipated. By 7 o'clock, the space was full in the way that good spaces get full, not packed uncomfortably, but dense with the particular energy of people who were genuinely moved by something and were staying because they didn't want to leave it yet. Joanne arrived at 6:45 and immediately found Emily near the back of the room. "There are people crying in front of the bus stop photograph," Joanne said. "I know," Emily said, "like multiple people, strangers." "I know, Joanne." Joanne looked at her. Her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was feeling something she was working to contain. "Do you understand what you built here?" Emily looked out at the room, at Frances standing near her portrait with her daughter beside her, the daughter who had sent the email, the one who had said my mother cried for 20 minutes, at Rosa who had come in from her own studio and was standing near the photograph of Emily from the very first session, the one where her body had still been in its apology position, and was talking to a young woman who appeared to be hanging on every word. At Victor and Priya from the photography center at Keisha, who was holding a glass of wine and beaming with proprietary pride. At Denise Walters, standing in front of her own image at the entrance to the gallery, looking at herself the way you look at something you recognize as yours, that you had forgotten you owned. "I'm beginning to," Emily said. Daniel appeared at her elbow with 2 glasses of sparkling water because he didn't drink at openings too many years of watching things go sideways when the wrong person got too comfortable, and handed her one. "Interview request," he said quietly. "From who?" "NPR. They want to do a feature. And there's a book editor here tonight who reached out to me last week. She wants to have breakfast with you tomorrow if you're available." He paused. "She represents writers and photographers. She's been in the industry for 20 years. She read your essay and apparently has been thinking about it since." Emily looked at him. "A book?" "She used the word memoir," Daniel said. "But also, and this is the part I want you to sit with, she mentioned a photography book as a companion piece. Your photographs and your words together in something permanent." Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about this essay she had written at her kitchen table at midnight, not for anyone, not for publication, just because something needed to be let out of the dark. She thought about the contact form on her website, and the 400 messages, and the ones that kept coming, the women who wrote, "I thought I was the only one." A book that could reach them. All of them. Not just the ones who had seen the magazine at a newsstand in the right city, but the ones in small towns and big cities and countries where the magazine didn't distribute the ones whose cameras were in storage closets and whose voices had been talked down to silence by someone who should have known better. "Yes," she said. "Tell her I'm available for breakfast." Daniel nodded once. "There's one more thing." "What?" "Serena Walsh is here." Emily went very still. "Nathan's Serena," she said. "She came alone," Daniel said quietly. "She's been here for 40 minutes. She's been standing in front of the photograph of the woman from the Cancer Project. She hasn't moved." Emily looked across the room. She found her immediately. Young, dark-haired, standing very still in front of the photograph of the woman who had survived breast cancer and no longer recognized herself in mirrors. She was not looking around the room. She was not aware of being observed. She was doing what people did in front of photographs that told the truth. She was simply looking, and the looking was costing her something. Emily excused herself from Daniel. She crossed the room slowly, not because she wasn't sure, but because she wanted to arrive at this particular moment with all of herself present, not reacting, not performing just there. She stopped beside Serena. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Serena became aware of her presence and turned, and when she recognized Emily, something moved through her face. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. The expression of someone who has walked into a room and found themselves in a situation more significant than they anticipated. "I didn't think you'd be here," Serena said. "I mean, obviously it's your show. That came out wrong." "It's okay," Emily said. Serena looked back at the photograph. "I came because I read the article, and then I read the essay, and I wanted to see the work in person." She paused. "I want to apologize. I know that might not be—" "You don't have to," Emily said. "I do," Serena said. Her voice was quieter than Emily expected it to be, more uncertain. She had imagined in the occasional private moments where she had allowed herself to think about Serena at all, someone brash, someone uncomplicated in her wanting. What she was looking at was a 27-year-old woman who seemed to be in the process of understanding something that was costing her considerably. I didn't know about you. Not at first. He told me you were already separated, that things had been over for a long time. She pressed her lips together. I found out later that wasn't the complete picture. Emily looked at her. When did you find out? Serena was quiet for a moment. The night he came back from serving you the papers, she said. He came to the restaurant where we were meeting and he was, I don't know, he was celebrating. And something about the way he was celebrating made me ask questions I hadn't asked before. And the answers... She stopped. We're not together anymore, she said. Haven't been since March. March. 4 months ago. 2 months after the first article ran. 2 months after Emily's face had started appearing in places Nathan had not anticipated it appearing. She thought about that timeline. She did not say anything about it aloud. Are you okay? Emily asked instead. Serena blinked, as if the question surprised her, as if she had come prepared for anger and received something she didn't know how to process. I'm figuring things out. Good, Emily said simply. That's all any of us are doing. She left Serena standing in front of the photograph. She did not tell Joanne about the conversation until later, much later after the gallery had closed and the last guest had gone, and Emily and Joanne and Daniel and Keisha and Rosa were sitting in the empty gallery with takeout containers and flat shoes and the particular exhaustion that comes after something significant. When Emily told them about Serena, the table went quiet. She apologized, Joanne said finally. She tried to. And you told her she didn't have to. Because she didn't. Not to me. Emily picked up a spring roll. She needs to figure out her own things. That's not my work to do. Joanne shook her head slowly. Who are you? And what have you done with my friend who used to apologize for taking up space in an elevator? Emily looked at her. She's still here, she said. She's just also someone else now. Both things at the same time. The book proposal took 3 months to put together. Emily worked on it in the early mornings before the studio opened, before the Tuesday evening workshops, before the emails and the calls, and the growing roster of women she was photographing for the expanded project that had taken on a life entirely its own. The editor's name was Catherine Marsh, no relation to Joanne, a coincidence that Emily found quietly amusing. Catherine was 55 and had been in publishing for 3 decades, and had the particular quality of people who have devoted their professional lives to other people's words, an absolute conviction in the power of language to change things held with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who has watched it happen repeatedly. They met for breakfast the morning after the gallery opening as arranged, and then every 2 weeks after that. Catherine asked questions the way Daniel had asked questions directly, without softening, trusting Emily to be able to answer them honestly. What do you want this book to do? Catherine asked at their 3rd meeting. Emily had thought about this. I want the woman with the camera in the storage closet to find it, she said. Catherine looked at her over her coffee cup. Not literally, Emily clarified. Or yes, literally. But also I want the woman who has been told she is ordinary, who has been told she is past it, who has been told the version of herself that someone else found inconvenient is the only version that exists. I want her to open this book and find herself in it. Not my story exactly, but the shape of it, the feeling of it. Catherine set down her cup. Then that's what we're making, she said. The book deal was announced in November. Emily found out about the announcement through Joanne, who sent a text at 8 in the morning that said simply, Emily Carter, I am looking at a press release with your name on it, and I am going to need you to call me immediately. Emily called her. A book deal, Joanne said. An actual book. An actual book, Emily confirmed, with a real publisher. With a very real publisher. Emily. Joanne's voice went to the quiet place, the place it went when things were too big for her normal register. I want to say something and I want you to hear me. Okay. Do you remember? Joanne stopped, started again. Do you remember the night you called me after Nathan left the very first night? You called me and you said you didn't recognize yourself anymore. You said you looked in the mirror and you didn't know who was looking back. Emily remembered. She remembered it with the specific clarity that pain leaves behind, even after the pain itself has receded, not sharp anymore but precise. The way a scar retains the exact shape of a wound long after the wound has healed. I remember, she said. You know yourself now, Joanne said. That's the whole story. Everything else, the magazine, the gallery, the book, that's just evidence. The real thing is that you know yourself now, and nobody can take that away from you, not ever again. Emily stood in her kitchen with the phone against her ear. She did not trust herself to speak for a moment. She looked at the copy of the magazine still on her kitchen table. She kept it there, she had decided, not as a trophy, and not as a reminder of Nathan's face going pale in an airport bookstore, which she had heard about eventually through a mutual friend who had been there and couldn't help herself from telling Joanne, who couldn't help herself from telling Emily, but as a marker. A fixed point in time that said before this and after this. The before being the woman at the ironing board, who had learned to make herself small, the after being everything that came next. "Thank you," she said to Joanne, "for not letting me be invisible, even when I was trying very hard to be." "You were never invisible to me," Joanne said simply. "You were just temporarily convinced that you were." The Tuesday evening workshops had by November a waiting list of 40 women. Emily ran them herself with occasional guest appearances from Rosa and Victor, and once Daniel, who came and spoke for 45 minutes about the difference between taking photographs and making them, and left the room in a state of collective inspired silence that lasted a full 3 minutes before someone asked a question. The women who came to the workshops were not all photographers. Some of them had never held a camera. Some of them came because they had read the essay and needed somewhere to be with people who understood the specific experience of having been made to feel invisible by someone close to them. Some of them came because their daughters had signed them up. Some of them came because they were 65 or 70 or 73 and still had the sense that there was something in them that hadn't been used yet, and they were running out of time to find out what it was. Emily looked at them, and she saw every Tuesday evening the same woman she had been at the beginning of all of this, the one who held the camera like a shield, the one whose body was in a constant state of apology. She looked at them the way she wished someone had looked at her earlier, with total attention, with the specific kind of seeing that says, "You are here, you are real, you are worth the looking." One evening in late November, near the end of a session, a woman named Gloria, 66 years old, retired teacher, recently widowed, raised her hand. "Can I ask you something personal?" Gloria said. "Yes," Emily said. "Do you ever miss him, your ex-husband, even knowing everything you know about how he treated you? Do you ever—" She paused, seeming to search for the right word. "Do you ever miss the idea of him, the version of him you thought you married?" The room was very quiet. Emily looked at Gloria, and she thought about the question honestly, the way she tried to do everything now without armor, without the rehearsed answer, without the self-protective distance she had once kept between herself and anything that might show too much. "Yes," she said. "Sometimes, not Nathan specifically, not who he actually turned out to be, but the idea I had, the version of the future I thought I was building." She paused. "The loss of an idea is real. You're allowed to grieve it. What you can't do is let the grief of the idea keep you loyal to the person who disproved it." Gloria nodded slowly. Her eyes were bright. "That's what I needed to hear," she said. After the workshop ended and the room had slowly emptied, Emily sat alone for a while in the quiet of the studio. She did this, sometimes stayed after, let the silence settle around her, gave herself time to simply be in the space she had built. She thought about the year. The 11 months that had passed since Nathan set papers on a kitchen table and told her with casual cruelty that she was not worth looking at. She ran through it the way you run through a map of somewhere you've traveled, not to relive every step, but to understand, looking back, how the path had connected. The camera in the closet, Daniel's studio, the bus stop woman whose name was Denise, Rosa telling her her body was apologizing, the essay written at midnight, the first article, Claire's call, the Vogue cover, the gallery, Francis Okafor, and the drawer full of 40 years of postponed wanting, Serena standing in front of the photograph of the cancer survivor, the book, all of it connecting backward to a kitchen table and a cold, decided voice saying, "You are not enough," which had turned out to be, in the most painful and precise way possible, the most wrong thing anyone had ever said to her. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from a number she now recognized, Denise Walters, the bus stop woman who had become, over the past months, a genuine presence in Emily's world. The text said, "I got the camera, the one from my closet. I took it out today. Thought you should know." Emily smiled. She typed back, "How did it feel?" Denise's response came quickly, like remembering a word I'd forgotten. Emily read that sentence and felt something move through her chest that was clean and warm and entirely uncomplicated. She put her phone in her pocket. She stood up. She picked up her camera bag, the one she had packed that morning for tomorrow's shoot. Another woman with another story that deserved to be seen. She turned off the studio lights. She locked the door. She walked out into the November night, her camera on her shoulder, her name on a book contract, her face known to more people than she could comfortably count, her story told and still being told, radiating outward from a kitchen table in Chicago into the lives of women she would never meet, who were pulling cameras out of closets and opening drawers full of postponed wanting and calling their sisters and deciding in bus stops and parking lots and quiet apartments to keep going. Nathan Brooks had told Emily Carter she was ugly. He had said it with the certainty of a man who had never learned the difference between seeing something and understanding it. He had said it and walked out the door to a woman waiting downstairs, and a future he had been secretly constructing while his wife ironed his shirts with the same patient care she brought to everything she had ever loved. He had been so certain. And certainty, Emily had learned, was sometimes just the loudest form of wrong. She had not become remarkable because Nathan left. She had become herself because she decided to. The leaving had simply cleared the room. And in the cleared room, in the quiet, after the door closed, in the particular silence of a life suddenly emptied of the voice that had been telling her who she was, she had found waiting with the patience of something that has always known its own worth, the woman she had been before anyone told her otherwise. That woman had a camera. That woman could see. And the world, it turned out, had been waiting a long time to be seen by her.